Inclusive Education at Rowan University, where I teach and do disability studies-informed research on inclusive education and the experiences of students who use text-based, multimodal forms of communication in schools. I'm an active member of the community of non-speaking people, their families, and allies. In addition to being a teacher-educator, I've been a communication partner, a trainer, a colleague, an advocate, and most importantly to me, a friend to many in this community. This module will focus on communication practice strategies, things like adapting materials in and out of the classroom, scaffolding, and the benefits of peer models. The topic is particularly important in that it contributes to developing an understanding of how to balance supports and strategies for communication access, as well as fostering relationships between communication partners and the communicators they support. Accessing text-based multimodal forms of communication requires consistent practice, much like any other skill, from playing an instrument, to driving, to dancing, to playing a sport. Communication practice often involves structured, interesting activities where the communication partner and communicator can focus primarily on the process of accessing augmentative and alternative forms of communication. This can involve things like establishing or fading the level or type of support, developing motor patterns for pointing, or simply getting to know one another or peers. So often in schools, communication partners and the students they support are paired at the beginning of a school year and expected to jump right in to participating actively in all aspects of school using AAC without having the opportunity to establish a relationship and the individualized support systems needed for students to do so successfully. This is a disservice. Even the most experienced AAC user needs to practice communication with new or different supports and people over time.
My name is Bella.
D I F F E R E N C E S.
I am a high school student working for my diploma. My goal after high school is to continue my education to study educational policy. I love learning and plan to advocate for access to a quality education for all students despite their differences.
We are really excited about this module because we get to give you a ton of ideas to help your students expand their communication in some pretty fun ways. So first, we're going to talk about some structures that will help your student advance in their levels of communication. Then we'll talk about different activities you can use to work on communication skills. So let's jump right into structures of communication. We're going to talk about language ladders, and then we're going to talk about targets. So what is a language ladder? A language ladder is a structure that provides us with a path toward open-ended communication, which is where we get to hear our students' original thoughts and ideas. Open-ended communication can look deceivingly easy once a seasoned student is typing out their thoughts with their trained communication partner, but the process to get there takes a lot of work. It takes practice and time. These structures are designed to help keep the student regulated as they build their skills one step at a time toward that target of open-ended communication. So it's important to know that even if you're working with a student who is open-ended in their communication with one communication partner, it doesn't mean that they'll be open-ended with others. Each communication partner will have to build their skills and develop a relationship with the student. Think about it like trying to have a conversation in an unfamiliar foreign language with someone who is fluent. You can only have a conversation at the level of the least experienced person. So when I go to Mexico and I'm speaking with the locals who are fluent in Spanish, while I'm not, I'm basically limited to finding a bathroom and ordering a beer, even if what I want is a hamburger.
A similar analogy is if you were to take your first salsa dancing lesson with an experienced salsa dance instructor. The first dance is not going to be pretty, even if you're dancing with a world-class dancer. But it isn't supposed to be pretty when you're learning. With practice, you can reach your goals together. Also important to note, you'll probably become a better dancer faster when you're dancing with a more experienced dancer. It will be a slower process if you're learning with someone who's less experienced. So be patient with yourself as you gain more experience and confidence.
So both of these examples of having a conversation in a foreign language or dancing salsa with an instructor requires partnership. The two of you have to learn how to flow together. You have to connect. You have to start from the level of the least experienced partner and build your skills together.
So let's take a look at a ladder that will help us know where to start and where to go. The language ladder is a scaffolding concept that helps us know when we need to make a question easier to meet our students where they are, easing up on that cognitive demand, or how to offer a slight stretch so they can be successful.
The first thing we might do is to spell a factual answer, something that we've just talked about or just taught to our student. So this might look like being in a science class and learning that plant cells are contained within the cell wall. So I could then ask my student to spell the cell part that contains a plant cell. So we would spell the word wall. So this task is a low pressure task and involves a low cognitive demand because it has one set answer where you can focus on establishing a rapport, getting into rhythm, and gauging the level of support or prompting needed for the student to be successful. So it's okay if you start with something the student may already know. We just want to be sure to acknowledge that they might already know this and that we're just getting used to each other. Speak respectfully by not speaking like the student can't hear or by using baby talk. Also, we want to make sure to keep moving on new material. So we want to avoid repetitive drilling. We can also check in with the student, which lets them know that we value their feedback and that we're in this together. Did you find this hard or okay or easy? Was this highly interesting, somewhat interesting, or flat out boring? This helps you establish a baseline of where the student and you are at with your skills and helps you keep in mind what the student and you want to work on next.
So once we've warmed up motorically by spelling a known answer, we want to create an awareness of helping our students by using reasoning questions. Why do we use reasoning questions? Why not just ask our students to repeat something we've just taught them? Because we're trying to engage their brains in purposeful movement. So throughout this course, we've spent time talking about automatic movements and that brain-body disconnect. We've talked about how some pathways in the brain become overmyelinated for actions, like typing the address to a specific YouTube video. Now we need to extend this understanding into the realm of purposeful movement. Let's take a step back into our own lives for a second. Think again about your commute to work. For many of us, this involves driving. We go the same way day after day. We make the same turns, shift into the same lanes, park in the same spaces. Our brains are on autopilot, so much so that we can listen to the radio or a podcast and still absorb new information while not really thinking about the movements our bodies are making in order to get us from home to work. The brain pathway involved in our driving here is relatively short. Info enters through the putamen area, it moves to the premotor cortex and then to the motor cortex. With practice, it becomes automatic. But now imagine there's a bad accident blocking all lanes up ahead, and you're going to need to detour to get to work. So just like your GPS probably says, recalculating, 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 while it figures out which way to send you, your brain is probably also shifting gears to do some of this recalculating itself. And what happens to that automatic movement you were using? It stops. What happens to your ability to listen and absorb new information? You probably noticed that you missed a few minutes of your podcast and you need to go back and listen again. When your brain is recalculating, you're using your reasoning skills. This involves a longer brain pathway. We observe, we think about what to do, and then we do it. At this point, your prefrontal cortex, the advanced thinking part of your brain, it kicks into action to help you figure out the next logical steps to take to move your car in the right direction. So many of our students are just flying on autopilot. They're going about their daily routines, tuning out while a teacher or a therapist says, point here, or do this, or ask them to do the same basic task they've been asked to do for years on end. So by using reasoning questions, we're trying to shift our students' brains and then their bodies from autopilot to recalculating.
So let's take a look at the first step of the ladder. Ask a reasoning question with 2 choices. You can ask a question about anything. Sometimes people get hung up on creating content to use in communication practice. Don't reinvent the wheel. Schools are full of interesting resources right at your fingertips. So after presenting a little slice of age-appropriate academic content, you can create a reasoning question that allows the student to practice a purposeful response. And remember, students can respond to this choice using whatever method they're most comfortable with, pointing to the choices written on a whiteboard, finding the first letter of their answer on a stencil or letterboard, or even spelling the entire word.
Okay, let's try this example. Let's say we're learning about World War I, and we read a sentence in our history textbook that says, in May 1915, the Germans sank the British ocean liner, the Lusitania. It's a pretty simple statement. So now I want you to keep track of just how many reasoning questions with 2 choices I'm offering here, all from reading just that one sentence. So you ready? Here we go. The Lusitania was a big ship. Would you be more likely to find a ship like this in the ocean or in a stream? If something sinks, does it stay at the surface of the water or go underwater? If another nation sunk one of your ships, do you think they would be your ally or your enemy? Are Germany and Britain the names of countries or cities? Back in 1915, if you were a regular person and you wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean, would you be more likely to sail on a ship or fly in an airplane? So I think if you've been counting, I think that's 5 questions, and they're all reasoning questions. So notice I'm not asking something like, what was the name of the ship that the Germans sank, the Titanic or the Lusitania? Or who sank the Lusitania, the Germans or the British? Remember that whole module on presuming competence? We're presuming that if our students are participating in a lesson about World War I, they've got the ability to answer questions that are harder than just repeating something we told them. So what if a student gets the answer wrong? We teach them. Remember that presuming competence doesn't equal presuming knowledge. My student may not know the meaning of the word ally, and perhaps that was their choice when I asked if someone who sank your ship would be your ally or your enemy. And so I teach them. I'd say, hey, actually, you know what? An ally is like your friend. They've got your back. An ally would never sink your ship. The person who would do that is your enemy. And then I move on. Remember that the point of communication practice isn't testing knowledge. It's teaching motor and regulation skills for purposeful movement.
So after asking a reasoning question with 2 choices, the next step on the ladder is asking a reasoning question with a predictable response. Again, we can use anything age appropriate as our content.